Part 52. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 511. Chapter 511 Visiting Mother. The news that the eldest prince was escorted back to the main city soon spread back to the main city. Everyone did not expect that the emperor was really cruel this time and did not leave a way for the eldest prince to survive. Faced with such vigorous and resolute actions, no one inside or outside the court dared to speak for the eldest prince. Even Lu Renfei's mother's family could only close their mouths and pretend to be dumb. The court was not peaceful, and the harem was also extremely depressed. Empress Zhen 11 began a thorough investigation into the murder of the royal heirs. There were dozens of people who were implicated and sent to the criminal punishment department. To put it bluntly, it was like vacating all the palaces where Yunying promised to live. Fan Qinjiao was not surprised when he heard the news. The empress knew the ins and outs of this incident, but she insisted on going to war like this. She was clearly trying to warn the harem and kill the chicken to scare the monkeys. Only if the people in the harem are frightened by the news, they will use their brains before doing anything. Understand what should be done and what should not be done. I heard that concubine Yu fell ill immediately and was recuperating in Yu Palace all day. Fan Qinjiao is familiar with this method. Once concubine Yu is in a low position, she will pretend to be sick to win the emperor's sympathy, but the emperor really does this. No one could rest inside or outside the palace, but Fan Qinjiao was happy and relaxed. After breakfast the next morning, we got on the carriage heading to Sun Mansion. My mother is now deep in the inner house and can no longer show up at will. I'm afraid she doesn't know the news of her return. But it doesn't matter, it's not convenient for my mother to come out, she can just come to the door in person. After setting off from the mansion in the western suburbs, it took almost half an hour for the carriage to stop at the door of Sun's mansion. Normally, a woman has to go to the side door. This is the rule in Ziliang that men are superior to women. But now Fan Qinjiao holds the title of crown princess, and even if she is not married yet, she is qualified to go to the main door. Ningguan accompanied the young lady up the steps and hurriedly knocked on the door. After a while, the heavy door was opened by the concierge. The boy guarding the door leaned out half of his body and looked at the unfamiliar master and servant in front of him. "What do you do?" Fan Qinjiao looked at the boy and frowned slightly. When her mother got married, she specially followed her around the Sun mansion in order to let everyone in the Sun family know about her existence and the importance she attached to her mother, so that no one would look down on her. But Fan Qinjiao was sure that she had never seen this concierge on the day of her mother's wedding. Ningguan didn't have as good a memory as her own lady, so she said, "Our lady came to see Mrs. Sunday." The boy was stunned for a moment, and then he pointed disdainfully in the direction of the side door. "If you want to see people, go to the side door." Yuluo directly closed the door. Ningguan was startled. When she came to her senses, she wanted to raise her hand and knock on the door again. Fan Qinjiao stopped him. "Let's go to the side door." Seeing what her young lady said, Ningguan didn't dare to delay and accompanied her to the side door. As a result, when the side door opened, the boy who poked his head out was still unfamiliar to Fan Qinjiao. However, when the waiter at the back door heard that Fan Qinjiao came to see his wife, he didn't have any embarrassment. He didn't even conduct an interrogation and just let him in. Facing such laxity and casualness, Fan Qinjiao felt that something was wrong. "You stay and wait for me. Mother is married after all, so the fewer people who know about the housework, the better." After Fan Qinjiao left Ningguan behind, he walked into the depths of Sun Mansion alone. There were indeed not many servants in the Sun family's mansion, but this time Fan Qinjiao didn't meet anyone. When he finally entered the main courtyard where his mother was, it was still empty. Stepping up the steps, as soon as I lifted the curtain, I smelled a strong smell of medicinal juice. Fan Qinjiao stood at the door and carefully identified it for a moment before he knew it was a prescription to soothe the nerves and nourish the fetus. Although her mother never inherited her grandmother's legacy, she grew up learning medical skills from her grandmother. Now Fan Kinjao just smelled it and knew that only the Tao family knew how to prepare medicines. Cough cough cough, cough cough cough. In the room, there were clear and shallow coughs that sounded intermittently. Fan Kinjao stepped across the threshold and walked into the house following the sound. As soon as he walked around the archway with bead curtains, he saw the figure sitting on the bed. Just looking at it from a distance, Fan Kinjao's heart began to sour as if he had swallowed a green plum. But the next second, she froze on the spot again. After not seeing her for a long time, my mother has gained a lot of weight, especially her belly, which is covered under the thin quilt, is as protruding as a ball. Of course Fan Kinjao knows that such a belly is not just fat that can bulge like this. So, mother, is she pregnant? It was Huayulian who was holding a teacup and trying to suppress the dry itching of her throat when she felt someone was looking at her. Looking sideways in confusion, when he saw his daughter standing next to the bead curtain, with the sun shining on her back, her whole body shining but a lot less clear, her eyes suddenly turned red. Huayulian trembled at the corners of her lips, but before she could make a sound, tears burst out of her eyes. Fan Kinjao suppressed the bitterness in his heart, looked at his mother's belly and said, "My daughter is unfilial and cannot be by her side when my mother needs her. Fortunately, my daughter came back in time. I hope my mother won't blame her." Huayulian could not hold back her tears again and again. Her family's Yuyater has superb medical skills and extraordinary intelligence. Which lady in the main city can compare with her? With a daughter like this, if she is not in a hurry to make her proud, how can she be blamed? Almost gritting her teeth to prevent herself from crying, Huayulian stretched out her hand to Fan Kinjao. "Come on Yuyater, come here and let me take a good look at you." She does not understand the affairs of government, but she also knows that the path her daughter has chosen is not easy. Huayulian's heart ached even more when she saw that there was no flesh on her palm-sized face. "Why are you so thin? But the food in the palace is not to your liking? Or is there something uncomfortable in your body? Have you told your grandmother? What did your grandmother say? But has she checked your pulse?" Faced with his mother's constant questioning, Fan Kinjao nodded and responded, "Don't worry, mother, it's just a bitter summer. When the heat is over, my daughter will naturally have an appetite, but my mother's stomach is a bit bigger month." Huayulian finally felt relieved when she saw that her daughter looked good. She looked down at her swollen belly and said softly, "It's only been 6 months, but now she knows how to make a fuss." Fan Kinjao remembered that when she returned to the house, her grandfather and her grandfather never mentioned anything. "Do my grandfather and grandmother know about my mother's pregnancy?" Huayulian was stunned for a long time before she looked away from Fan Kinjao and said, "My mother hasn't had time to talk about your grandfather and grandmother yet. I plan to wait for a while before talking." Hearing this, Fan Kinjao frowned even more. It is a good thing to import additional products, why should we deliberately hide it? Obviously, Huayulian didn't want Fan Kinjao to continue asking, so she grabbed Fan Kinjao's hand and gently placed it on her stomach. Soon, the little thing in the belly started to feel restless. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 512. Chapter 512 The Sun Family's Big Change. Huayulian asked Fan Kinjao to reach out, just to reassure her that she was doing well. Unexpectedly, the child in the belly really responded. Huayulian felt sour and happy at the same time. Maybe this was the so-called blood connection. As soon as I knew my sister was coming to visit, I couldn't wait to say hello to her. After gently stroking her belly a few more times, Huayulian's eyes became softer. "Don't worry, your mother will definitely give birth to you well and let you see your sister with your own eyes. Your sister is a very powerful person. As long as she is here, She can protect you well. Hua Yuelian looked at her mother, who was immersed in joy and couldn't extricate herself, and did not interrupt her. Instead, he took this opportunity and carelessly touched his mother's wrist. The pulse is stable, fluent, and smooth, which is a very stable happy pulse. Just looking at his mother's wrist, which was more than a circle thicker, Fan Kinjao still frowned slightly. The fetus is in the 6th month when it is absorbing nutrients. At this time, women usually have a good appetite because the children in their belly are fighting for food. So generally the weight gain period for pregnant women is around July and August. Looking at her mother's round face with slightly dark bags under her eyes, Fan Kinjao asked softly, "Mother, have you not slept well these days?" The hand that was stroking her belly paused for a while, then Hua Yulian smiled and said, "I guess I haven't taken care of a child for a long time, so I'm not used to it." Even now, Fan Kinjao could still smell the soothing smell mixed with the anti-fetal medicine in the house, but he did not suggest to prescribe medicine to his mother. Just looking at his mother's rosy cheeks but sluggish eyes, Fan Kinjao still paid special attention. What kind of guests are coming to this mansion? My daughter has not met a single servant all the way here. This situation usually only occurs when guests come to the mansion, and they are very important guests. Hua Yuelian smiled and said, "It's your uncle's son's mother who came and said she wanted to stay here for a while." Fan Kinjao remained silent and did not speak. Fan Kinjao did not have any good impression of this MRS Sun family. Corruption, the city, just want to squeeze the benefits of squeezing from Sunfu. How could a person like this who is addicted to calculations simply come to stay for a while? Seeing her daughter's expression, Hua Yulian knew that she was worried about herself. She held her hand and said softly, "I have been lazy since I got pregnant. You also know that your uncle's son is very busy on weekdays. I can no longer let your uncle's son worry about the food and trivial matters in this house. Now that MRS son is here, I can feel more relaxed." Fan Kinjao looked at her mother and asked, "Mother, do you really feel relaxed?" Hua Yuelian smiled and nodded, "This is natural. Besides, the child and I are not good, so what benefits can MRS son's wife get?" This is quite true. No matter how greedy MRS son is for money, she will never conflict with her mother. But Fan Kinjao always felt that his mother was not really at ease. Otherwise, what would be the reason for the dark circles under her eyes? Hua Yulian was afraid that her daughter would think too much, so she paused and said, "By the way, have you seen your grandmother since you returned home? Some time ago, I heard that your grandmother was in poor health, so I specially asked my grandmother to go back. It's been more than a month since I took care of him." Hearing these words, Fan Kinjao's heart tightened. She has naturally seen her grandmother, and that is why she can be sure that except for a few strands of white hair on her temples, her grandmother is in good spirits. With a complexion like that, even if you don't need to diagnose your pulse, you will definitely not feel uncomfortable. To put it bluntly, even if something happened to my grandmother, she would never come to the Sun Mansion to tell my mother and let my mother worry with her. The nanny who was with my mother at first was my mother's married nanny. To put it bluntly, in this Sun Mansion, the only one who is my mother is the nanny. Furthermore, if this matter really happened, my grandmother would never say a word about it. But from the beginning to the end, my grandmother and grandfather never even mentioned that their mother was pregnant. I'm afraid, I don't know at all. Hua Yulian saw something was wrong with her daughter's expression, and was about to ask when footsteps suddenly sounded at the door. A maid opened the curtain and entered the door. When she saw Fan Kinjao, the maid was obviously startled. "Who are you?" Hua Yuelian hurriedly said, "This is my natal daughter, who came here specifically to visit me." The maid said, "Oh," then looked at Hua Yuelian and said, "The old lady asked me to inform madam that she should go to the main hall and lunch is ready." Hearing these words, Fan Kinjao's heart became colder. Even though he knew that his mother was pregnant, he still insisted on going to the main hall. Looking at this maid again, not only is she a faceless person, she also has no respect for her master inside or out. Go and tell Mr's son that I want to stay and have dinner with my mother this time. Fan Kinjao spoke first without waiting for her mother to say anything. She wanted to take a closer look at what was going on in the Sun Mansion. The maid seemed a little surprised when she heard that Fan Kinjao stayed without invitation. She nodded quickly and ran away. Hua Yuelian looked at her daughter and said, "These servants were specially brought here by Mrs. Sunday. They are all children of poor families in the countryside. It is natural that things are not doing well in some places. You Yair can rest assured that my mother will take good care of her. Take care of yourself and the baby in your belly." Fan Kinjao looked at his mother and smiled, winking playfully. "My daughter just wants to stay and have a meal with her, so how can my mother so cruelly push her away?" Hua Yuelian felt helpless when she looked at her daughter, who was pretending to be naughty in front of her. "Even though I know that she can't stand her acting coquettishly the most, I still. That's all. If you want to stay, just stay. It's just a meal, and I don't think Crescent Moon will see anything." Fan Kinjao could see her mother's cryptic look at a glance, but she didn't ask any further questions. Some things would be clearer to her than to ask them, but to see them with her own eyes. Reaching out to help his mother off the bed, Fan Kinjao pulled his mother to sit in front of the dressing table. He carefully combed the scattered hair around her mother's cheeks, and then knelt down to straighten her hair. He helped his mother out of the house with her clothes on. Different from the last time when there was no one around, this time when Fan Kinjao accompanied his mother to the main hall, he could see servants and maids waiting on both sides of the road everywhere. It's just that they didn't salute or say hello, they just looked at Fan Kinjao with wide eyes. Seeing this, Fan Kinjao sneered even more in his heart. These slaves obviously didn't recognize her, including the maid who just came to deliver the message. In just a short time, all these people came out to greet her. Obviously, what is being told? The sunshine at noon was strong, and by the time Hua Yuelian walked to the main hall, she was already sweating profusely. Fan Kinjao was carefully helping his mother up the steps when he heard a warm call from inside the door. "Oh my God! I just heard the servant said that. I still don't believe it. No, I didn't expect that. It was really the prince. Your Majesty is here." End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 513. Chapter 513. The old lady of the Sun family has not seen her for a long time. Fan Kinjao didn't need to raise his head, he could tell who it was just by hearing the voice. So she didn't even mean to talk to her, and still supported her mother carefully. When the two of them entered the main hall, Hua Yulian, who was covered in sweat, let out a long and weak breath. Fan Kinjao helped his mother sit down at the round table before picking up the teacup on the table. Putting it carefully to her mouth to test the temperature, she handed it to her mother. "Mother, take a sip of tea to relieve the heat." Hua Yuelian felt sour and warm in her heart when she looked at her daughter, who was obedient to her and took good care of her. Forced to get rid of the flush in her eyes, she took the cup and drank it in one gulp. The old lady of the Sun family on the side watched helplessly as Fan Kinjao supported Hua Yuelian and passed by her. From the beginning to the end, she never even glanced at her, and the smile that still hung on the old face was just like this. Somewhat stiff. But soon, the old lady of the Sun family came over with a smile again. "Yulian, what's wrong with you? Don't you come here to eat on weekdays? Why do you look so weak today? I'm afraid the crown princess is here. Probably because of too much excitement." As the old lady of the Sun family spoke, she grabbed the fan lying nearby and fanned it vigorously. The strong wind whipped up with unabashed force, blew all the strands of Hua Yulian's hair onto her cheeks. Hua Yulian, who was already sweating, trembled all over, looked up helplessly and smiled, "I'm not hot, so I won't bother the old lady." "No trouble, no trouble. What you are carrying in your belly now is my precious grandson. With me here, I can't let you suffer any injustice." The old lady of the Sun family didn't listen to Huayuelian's obstruction at all. His fan fanned even harder. As a result, the fan was snatched away by another hand before I fanned it a few times. The old lady of the Sun family turned around in surprise and saw Fan Kinjao placing the fan lightly on the chair beside her. The old lady of the Sun family was a little unhappy when she saw this. "What do you mean, princess?" Fan Kinjao raised his head and asked, "Didn't the old lady of the Sun family hear my mother say that it's not necessary?" When the old lady of the Sun family heard this, she just smiled and said, "What do I think it's about? The crown princess is proud of her body and her flesh is expensive, so she doesn't know these trivial things. But what Yulian is carrying now is my grandson. Naturally, the baby is on fire. Looking at her sweating profusely, she must be very hot. Naturally, she needs to be fanned to feel more comfortable." As he said that, he just wanted to bend down to get the fan again. Fan Kinjao knocked away the fan that the old lady of the Sun family was holding again, with dark eyes. But before Fan Kinjao could say anything, Huayuelian smiled and said, "My body is thin during pregnancy, and what I fear most is the alternation of cold and heat. It would be bad if I really get the cold." While Huayuelian spoke, she took Fan Kinjao's hand and blocked it behind her. The old lady of the Sun family was obviously unhappy, but after hearing this, she could only say, "In our countryside, which woman does not work in the fields when she is pregnant? No matter how hot or cold it is, women in the city are delicate." Huayuelian is still smiling. "As a doctor, it's normal for you yet to be anxious. In fact, she is worried about my health. This child naturally hopes that I can give birth to a healthy child for my husband." Once the old lady of the Sun family heard about her grandson, her face finally softened. Looking up at Fan Kinjao again, the old lady of the Sun family finally smiled and said, "I was reckless, don't blame the crown princess." Although Fan Kinjao is not married yet, no one in the main city is allowed to address her as crown princess when mentioning the word Fan Kinjao. Even if she relies on the fact that she is Sun Che's stepmother, she does not dare to really talk to Fan Kinjao. Kinjao was furious. Fan Kinjao looked at the hypocritical smile of the old lady of the Sun family, and was too lazy to even deal with it. If she remembers correctly, this old lady of the Sun family has a son of her own. Normally speaking, how could it be possible to take a stepson's child so seriously? However, her mother's obstruction reminded her of something. Now neither mother nor Sun Che can easily quarrel with the old lady of the Sun family. Once something happens between my mother and the old lady of the Sun family, the temper of the old lady of the Sun family will definitely make it known to the whole city. By then, the black gauze hat on Sun Che's head was no longer stable. As a parent official, but you don't get along well with your mother, how will you convince the public in the future? Since my mother is a woman, she belongs to the Sun family. If there is a dispute with her mother-in-law, the reputation of Sun Che, the child in her belly, and her will be damaged. Although Fan Kinjao didn't care, she didn't want to embarrass her mother. At this moment, Sun Che, who was off duty, entered the door. When he saw Fan Kinjao, Sun Che was also stunned, and then he smiled and said, "I just met Lord Zhang. I heard that the crown princess had returned to the main city. I thought he was looking for fun with me, but I didn't expect that little Kinjao was really back." Sun Che was talking to Fan Kinjao, but his eyes were looking for Huayuelian. The tenderness and attention in his eyes are self-evident. Fan Kinjao saw that Sun Che was still as sincere as before, so he called out, "Uncle Sunday." Sun Che quickly raised his head and said, "But I can't help it. I will always salute you and say hello to you when we meet in the future." The old lady of the Sun family said with a smile, "We are all a family, why bother saying these restrictive words that hurt the harmony? Come and sit down quickly, otherwise the food will be cold in a while." As the old lady of the Sun family spoke, she invited everyone to sit around the round table. Fan Kinjao naturally had to be next to his mother, and the one on the other side of her mother was Sun Che. Normally, the old lady of the Sun family should be on the other side of Sun Che, but the old lady of the Sun family deliberately sat a little further away. Fan Kinjao looked over calmly and saw an empty round stool between the old lady of the Sun family and Sun Che. 3 people, but 4 stools. It is clear that someone else is coming. Just as Fan Kinjao was thinking, he heard a series of calls from far to near in the yard. "Cousin, cousin." The sound arrives before the person arrives. Just listening to the sound is very clear and sweet. Soon, an exquisite figure stepped through the door. At the age of 17 or 18, she is as delicate as the flowers in the yard. The pale pink dress is floor length, her skin is a little dark, and she is not that outstanding in appearance, but she is young. This woman's charm is very contagious. From the moment she walked in, the entire main hall seemed to have become lively. Even the servants in the yard showed fond smiles. Sun Che and the old lady of the Sun family seemed to have adapted to the woman's presence. Except for Hua Yuelian, who glanced at Fan Kinjao vaguely, everyone else was talking to the woman naturally. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 514. Chapter 514. Turns out she is a distant cousin. I saw that the sun was very bright today, so I specially made a soup of tangerine peel and candied dates for my cousin to relieve the heat. The weather is so hot, why do you bother so much? My cousin is generous when I live here, so I have to take good care of my cousin. Fan Kinjao found it interesting when he heard this. During hot weather, it is easy to accumulate heat and lose appetite. Shuachenpi has the effects of promoting qi, strengthening the spleen, drying dampness, and resolving phlegm. And candied dates can replenish qi, relieve coughs, nourish the lungs and kidneys, resolve phlegm, and relieve asthma. I have to say that this girl is really thoughtful. Fan Kinjao turned to look at his mother, and deliberately raised his voice a little. I didn't expect that my mother's house would find such a capable servant, so I can rest assured that my mother can take good care of her baby. Fan Kinjao's words were like extremely cooling weather, instantly freezing the lively main hall into ice. The old lady of the Sun family quickly said, "The princess has misunderstood. This is my distant niece." After finishing speaking, he did not forget to glance at Sun Che. Sun Che coughed, looked at the woman and said, "Li Rong, please meet the crown princess soon." As soon as the woman heard that she was the princess, she was either frightened or unsteady, and she knelt straight on the ground. Plop, it hurt just to hear it. Min's daughter Zhu Lirong, I've met the crown princess." While speaking, he didn't forget to kowtow to the ground heavily. Such a simple and timid appearance really makes people feel sad to see him. Seeing this, the old lady of the Sun family hurriedly stretched out her hand to support her. There is no need for such a big gift, the crown princess is not an outsider. Zhu Lirong was stunned when she raised her head. I heard the old lady of the Sun family say, "The crown princess is the daughter of your cousin-in-law, so she should be called my cousin-in-law." At this level, one really wants to trample Fan Kinjao to death under his feet. Zhu Lirong heard from her cousin that her cousin-in-law was married for the second time and had a daughter in her natal family. But she never knew that this daughter was the famous crown princess of the main city. The old lady of the Sun family has a disdain for Fan Kinjao, but she can't afford to offend him, so she won't take the initiative to bring it up. As the saying goes, a person who gets married is like water thrown out. No matter how married Hua Yulian is, she is a member of the Sun family once she enters the Sun family's door. Logically speaking, unless it's a big or small matter, you can't visit the girl at will at your mother's house. The old lady of the Sun family is something that even the old lady of the Hua family doesn't dare to do, but Fan Kinjao does. And he came so confidently. Of course, Fan Kinjao would not respond to the little cousin's call, so he looked at Sun Che and said nothing. Sun Che just looked at his stepmother and said, "The crown princess is the crown prince's official concubine. Even her son has to pay homage to her. From now on, it would be better for my mother not to say anything about randomly identifying relatives." The old lady of the Sun family was unhappy. "Why am I talking nonsense? Yulian, do you think I am right?" Hua Yulian, who was named, looked a little ugly. If she was wronged, forget it. Since she married into the Sun family, she didn't care so much for the harmony of the family, but if she wanted to put pressure on her daughter, she would not agree even to death. But before Hua Yuelian could speak, Zhu Lirong took the old lady of the Sun family's arm and said, "Cousin, you don't understand. The crown princess is aloof, so of course we can't scream. Don't embarrass my sister-in-law." As he said that, he looked at Sun Che and blinked. "I'm hungry, let's eat, cousin." Sun Che was pleased that Zhu Orion was well behaved and sensible, and said with a smile, "Okay, let's eat." Zhu Orion looked at Sun Che and smiled, and the smile on her face became even sweeter. Fan Kinjao has not yet gotten married, so he doesn't pay that much attention to the rules. Besides, she didn't come here today just to show off. After helping my mother sit down, she also sat down. The dinner table is full of meat-based dishes. There are many varieties, but the taste is also quite strong. Sweet and sour pork loin, braised lion head, braised pork belly. Hua Yulian found it hard to swallow just by looking at it. However, the old lady of the Sun family still put vegetables into Hua Yuelian's bowl regardless. "Yulian, you eat more. Only if you eat more can my grandson grow stronger and eat more meat." These dishes were all prepared by Li Rong after working for a long time. Facing the enthusiasm of the old lady of the Sun family, Hua Yuelian was really embarrassed and had no way to refuse. She could only smile and watch the dishes in the bowl being piled up one by one. And she herself had obviously started to gag, but she still had to force herself to swallow. Seeing Hua Yuelian being so obedient, the old lady of the Sun family looked at Sun Che with a smile and said, "Being able to eat is a blessing. I would say that my son is blessed. He even marries a wife who is so virtuous." Although Sun Che was not very close to the stepmother, she was able to take the initiative to take care of Hua Yuelian's body, and since he came to the house, he and Li Rong have been busy, and he still felt that grateful. Thinking like this, Sun Che even served the old lady of the Sun family some food. "You should also eat more." The old lady of the Sun family's eyes just smiled wider. Zhu Lirong was holding vegetables for Sun Che. "Cousin, try this. I got up early to pick out the meat. I specifically chose the fat and thin ones, so that the lion's head tastes better." Sun Che smiled and nodded. "Thank you for your hard work, Li Rong, and I've made you worry too." Zhu Lirong's face turned red and she said shyly, "It's my duty to serve my cousin." "Cousin, please stay away from me." The old lady of the Sun family also chimed in, "Yes, Li Rong is right. One family speaks to two families. Looking at the harmony and beauty here, we can indeed be called a family." Looking back at Fan Kinjao and Hua Yuelian, they seem to be completely unnecessary and transparent people. Snap dash. An extremely discordant sound interrupted the laughter at the dinner table. Fan Kinjao put down the chopsticks in his hand without hesitation. Sun Che and Zhu Lirong instinctively looked at Fan Kinjao who made the sound. "Old lady of the Sun family. What happened again?" Fan Kinjao looked at Sun Che and said, "The weather is too hot, so it will be uncomfortable to eat these greasy things. I wonder what vegetables are available in this house." The old lady of the Sun family was confused. "These are all good things. Ordinary people may not be able to eat such big fish and meat all year round. How could the crown princess not like it? The food cooked by our family Lirong is the best. Let's try the food again, princess. Fan Kinjao raised his eyes coolly and looked at the old lady of the Sun family who was holding meat for him. I said that I can't eat, not because of the food, but because I don't want to eat meat. Why should the old lady of the Sun family be so aggressive? The old lady of the Sun family was shocked. I mean, well, why are you forcing me? Sun Che stood up and said, today's meal is a bit heavy. I'll go to the kitchen to see if there are any vegetables. Zhu Lirong hurriedly stood up to stop her. Why bother my cousin with such a small matter? I'll just go. If not, I'll just cook a few dishes myself. Sun Che nodded. I'm sorry to bother you. Zhu Lirong smiled and said, you're welcome, cousin. This is where I should sit. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 515. Chapter 515. What a scheming bitch. Zhu Lirong left, and the old lady of the Sun family didn't look good. Fan Kinjao looked at Sun Che and saw that Sun Che's expression was clear and his face was magnanimous, so he didn't say anything more. Hua Yulian looked at her daughter sitting next to her. The more uneasy she felt, the more she felt compelled to eat the greasy food. It took almost a stick of incense before Zhu Orang entered the door carrying 2 plates of vegetables. One plate is fried shrimps with celery, usually crispy fried cucumbers. The old lady of the Sun family saw Zhu Orang's face covered with sweat. She stood up distressedly and pulled Zhu Orang to look around. For those who don't know, they thought Fan Kinjao had just returned from Zhu Orang's battlefield. The old lady of the Sun family not only watched it herself, but also called to Sun Che, it's such a hot day, and my face is all red from the heat. Che-er, you have some tea over there, hurry up and give Ariar a sip. Sun Che was stunned for a moment. I've already drunk this tea. I'll just ask my servant to pour me another cup. Whatever we have, we are all one family. The old lady of the Sun family thought there was no problem, and even went around to hand Sun Che's teacup to Zhu Orirong. Hua Yuelian watched Zhu Lirong drink Sun Che's tea, and her hand holding the chopsticks shook. But soon, she lowered her head and continued to eat the rice in the bowl. She really couldn't eat these meat dishes, and she was really afraid of vomiting them out after a while. A pair of chopsticks suddenly came into view. Soon, some celery and shrimp appeared in the bowl. When Hua Yuelian raised her head, she saw Fan Kinjao saying softly, I just tasted it. It tastes pretty good. Mom should try it too. If you like it, I'll give it to you. Hua Yuelian felt even sadder in her heart when she saw her Yuye's sensible look. Her daughter has really grown up, and every move she makes is like a lady. Because of this, she hopes her Yuye will be well. It's always been good. A maid came in from outside, the soup bowl in her hand exuding a rich aroma. When Sun Che saw this, he wanted to get up and serve Hua Yuelian soup, but Zhu Oryang snatched the spoon from his hand. Today's soup, I've been making it all morning, and my cousin wants to give it a try, Zhu Orang said, and gave the first bowl of soup to Sun Che. Subsequently, she served another bowl to the old lady of the Sun family, Hua Yuelian, and Fan Kinjao. Sun Che saw that the soup was already placed in front of Hua Yuelian, but he didn't say anything more. Zhu Lirong looked closely at Sun Che, who was holding up the soup bowl, and waited until Sun Che nodded in approval of the soup. The smile on his face was not to mention how sweet it was. Hua Yuelian drank the soup in front of her in silence, the steaming mist covering her sore eyes. The old lady of the Sun family was full of praise for Zhu Oryang's soup. The result was good. Zhu Lirong looked at Hua Yuelian and said, it turns out that my cousin also likes to eat vegetables. In fact, my cousin should have told me earlier. It was my fault that made my cousin feel wronged. You must blame me for being careless. I know it was my fault. My cousin-in-law must not chase me away. The more he talked, the more aggrieved he became, and in the end he burst into tears. This frightened the old lady of the Sun family. She also looked at Hua Yuelian and said, "Yulian, we are all a family. Is there anything we can't say in person? Li Rong is still young, so some things must be wrong. It's not thoughtful enough, but Li Rong has a good heart, otherwise why would she sleep with you every night?" Hua Yuelian didn't have much fluctuation. She seemed to have been used to it and said calmly, "It's cousin Li Rong who is too worried. I don't have any other intentions." Zhu Lirong looked at Hua Yuelian with tearful eyes, but she shed more tears. Those who didn't know better thought that Hua Yuelian had bullied someone. Fortunately, Sun Che spoke at this time, "Li Rong, you really are overthinking this time. I understand Yu Lian's temperament, and she will never blame you." Zhu Lirong probably didn't expect that Sun Che would help Hua Yuelian, so she looked at Sun Che blankly for a long time before she stopped crying. Fan Qinjiao sees this, what else can't he understand? What did the MRS Sun and Zhu Ziyang's idea, the mother-in-law did not see it? It was my mother who was deliberately giving in. Firstly, she didn't want the Hua family to get a bad reputation, and secondly, she didn't want it to affect her wedding. But Fan Qinjiao has never had such a good temper. Fortunately, Sun Che had no other thoughts, otherwise she would not be sitting here with such a good temper. It was precisely because Sun Che had no other thoughts that he could not act rashly. Otherwise, if the matter really gets bigger, I'm afraid it will hurt the feelings of my mother and Sun Che. After thinking about what everyone just said, Fan Qinjiao had a plan in mind. It was rare that Sun Che was not on duty in the afternoon today. After lunch, he went directly to the study. Fan Qinjiao accompanied his mother back to the courtyard and talked with her for a while. As a result, while talking, my mother was so sleepy that she closed her eyes. Fan Qinjiao stood up and walked to the courtyard, calling to a maid who was passing by, "Do you know where Zhu Orion is?" The maid nodded. "Usually at this time, Miss Li Rong is in the kitchen studying dinner." Fan Qinjiao took out a piece of silver from his sleeve and threw it to the maid. "Lead the way." The maid happily took the money and was busy leading the way. Fan Qinjiao asked as he walked, "Why haven't I seen you people before?" After the maid collected the money, she naturally talked a lot. "We are all from the village near the old lady. We heard that the old lady was looking for servants to go to the city, so we followed her. So, all the people in this house are brought here by the old lady of the Sun family. Absolutely, some of them are introduced to each other anyway, they are all from our village." Hearing these words, Fan Qinjiao's heart felt chilly, even with the huge sun above his head. Replace all the original people with those you are familiar with, what else is there for? Naturally, he wanted to completely remove his mother's power in the Sun mansion. This old lady from the Sun family is really amazing. Fan Qinjiao thought for a while and then said, "I didn't expect MRS Sun to be so generous. Sun Che's salary is only that much, and now it's the expenses of the house and the monthly salary of the servants. If you add it up carefully, it's not a small amount." Hearing this, the maid paused in her steps. Seeing this, Fan Qinjiao took out a few more pieces of silver and handed them over. The maid came from the countryside and did not know Fan Qinjiao at all, let alone his identity. Now she took the money and immediately said, "Now the old lady is in charge of the middle minister in the house, but every month it is the lady who is in charge. She took the dowry to pay for the money in the house, but last month she just took less, so the old lady was looking for death. The maid just wants to make money, and she is not familiar with the old lady of the Sun family, so she dares to say anything now." End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 516. Chapter 516, the first time, there will be a second time. Don't you care, Mr. Sun? Master Sun is so busy on weekdays, how can he have time to take care of these things? Fan Kinjao just understood. No wonder the food in the Sun Mansion is so good, and it's like sucking my mother's blood. Under the pretext of being good to my mother, I spend all day lavishly eating and drinking. And mother, no matter how disgusted her body is, she still has to swallow it for the sake of peace. Gradually, my mother's body became mellower, and even Sun Che thought that all this was for her mother's good. Okay. It's really good. Suppressing the anger of chopping up the old lady of the Sun family and feeding it to the dogs, Fan Kinjao came to the kitchen. As soon as he entered the courtyard, he saw Zhu Lirong chatting and laughing with several servants. This scene is really indescribably harmonious and dazzling. Zhu Lirong didn't expect Fan Kinjao to come. His face that was full of smiles just now suddenly felt awkward. Fan Kinjao smiled and said, "Miss Lirong, don't be nervous. I just have something to tell you." Zhu Lirong nodded and dismissed all the servants in the yard. Fan Kinjao took advantage of the situation and sat on the stone bench in the yard, looking at Zhu Orion indifferently. Zhu Lirong stood there without sitting down. Her body was very tense, as if she had been punished. Fan Kinjao didn't have time to give up his seat to Zhu Lirong. He raised his chin slightly, smiled softly, and said, "Miss Lirong is very attentive, she is actually busy with Uncle Sun, I'm afraid she even knows his taste clearly, right?" Zhu Lirong listened to this, with a flash of pride in her eyes. "My cousin is always very busy on weekdays. I just want to make my cousin feel more comfortable in the house. Although I haven't been here for a long time, I know that my cousin is very busy. My brother likes sweet food but not spicy food, and he likes to drink porridge every night as a snack. Even knowing about late night snacks, it's really thoughtful." Fan Kinjao raised his hand and knocked on the stone table in front of him, and said with a smile, "There are only two people in this yard, Miss Lirong and me. Why should Miss Lirong continue to pretend?" Zhu Lirong was stunned, and her body stiffened instantly. As if he didn't understand what Fan Kinjao said, he opened his eyes in confusion and said, "I don't understand what the crown princess means. If you don't understand, how can you sleep with my mother every night, not to break up the relationship between mother and Sun Che? If you don't understand, how can you be so attentive in front of Sun Che? After all, you simply want to replace my mother's position in Sun Che's heart little by little." Zhu Lirong trembled all over, still shaking her head. "Princess, you misunderstood, I really didn't." Fan Kinjao raised his eyebrows and interrupted, "Since you know my identity, you should understand that what I want from the Sun Mansion is just a matter of one sentence. If it comes to identity, even Sun Che will do it in front of me. Dolly, who do you think you are and dare to show off in front of me?" Fan Kinjao was, after all, a queen in her previous life. No matter how miserable she was at that time, the sharp aura and powerful aura of a person who has sat in the phoenix position is unmatched by others. Just like Zhu Lirong now, her face has turned completely pale. "Do you really think that with the support of the old lady of the Sun family as a matchmaker, you can ask my mother to abdicate in favor of a worthy person? Miss Lirong's thinking is too simple, or too naive." Fan Kinjao smiled softly, but his sharp black eyes seemed to tear Zhu Orion into pieces. Hearing this, Zhu Lirong was so frightened that her legs went weak. "I really don't have that idea. My cousin is also devoted to my cousin." "Princess, you really misunderstood. We have no other thoughts. It doesn't matter whether you have him or not. I'll go find Sun Che soon. Either you get out, or he gets out of his current official position. Would the old lady of the Sun family still be so fawning to a powerless Sun Che? Will Zhu Lirong still want to commit herself to her? Of course not. Even if Zhu Lirong calls Sun Che a cousin, Sun Che is more than 10 years older than her. Zhu Lirong was really scared. She bent her knees and knelt on the ground. She even wanted to kowtow and said, "Crown Princess." Before she could finish her words, Fan Kinjao stretched out his toes and touched her chin. "You secretly want to marry my mother, but now you openly come to me to beg for mercy. Do you think I'm a fool? Princess, you really misunderstood. My cousin is so kind, how could you treat him like that? Stop your pretense. Since I was able to get the old lady of the Sun family to get out once, I will naturally find a way to get the old lady of the Sun family to take you out again." Zhu Lirong was angry and panicked after hearing these words, and was trembling all over. Fan Kinjao raised his toes a little more, supported Zhu Lirong's chin and said, "Did you understand what I said?" Zhu Lirong nodded instinctively under the pressure of this invisible aura. "Now that you understand, you can get out and go inform the old lady of the Sun family. It's best to ask her to pack the package in advance so that she won't look too embarrassed when leaving," Fan Kinjao said. "Suddenly take back your legs." Zhu Lirong, who was unprepared, gnawed on the ground. It's just that Zhu Lirong couldn't care less about the pain now, and ran away in a hurry without even having time to wipe her tears. Fan Kinjao shook the hem of her skirt and stood up. Instead of leaving immediately, she stepped into the kitchen. On the kitchen stove, a casserole is still simmering, and the rock sugar pear inside is exuding a sweet and glutinous fragrance. Fan Kinjao picked up the spoon and scooped out a bowl, picked up the pepper on the side, poured all the rock sugar and snow pears in the bowl, and then walked out. After asking around all the way, Fan Kinjao came to Sun Che's study. It was Sun Che who was working in the study. Hearing that the boy came to report that Fan Kinjao was here, he quickly came out to greet him personally. "Why is little Kinjao here?" Regarding Fan Kinjao, Sun Che felt sorry for her past, and now he admired her step by step for her current position as the princess. Fan Kinjao took the initiative to enter the door and placed the soup bowl in his hand on the desk in Sun Che's office. "This is the rock sugar snow pear that was just stewed in the kitchen. I just wanted to come over and tell Uncle Sun something. Just by the way. Bring it over." Sun Che quickly picked up the soup bowl and scooped it up gently to make the soup cool faster. Fan Kinjao looked around the study and said casually, "Uncle Sun, do you still remember what you promised me when you married my mother?" Sun Che was stunned for a moment, and then said sternly, "I will never take a concubine again in this life, and I will never let your mother down." This is his oath, of course he remembers it. Fan Kinjao nodded and asked again, "So, Uncle Sun, do you think my mother is doing well?" End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 517. Chapter 517. Don't do to others what you don't want others to do to you. Sun Che felt something was wrong when he heard this, and couldn't help but think more carefully. Since Yu Lian got married, I boast that I have never done anything to feel sorry for her. When she was pregnant, I felt guilty that I could not be with her all day long, but fortunately my stepmother and sister Li Rong were able to help take care of her. Kinjao, you ask like this, but what kind of injustice did Yu Lian suffer? Facing Sun Che's question, Fan Kinjao asked instead, is the food in the house the same as today? Sun Che just understood. Li Rong said, Yu Lian is in need of nourishment now, and the meat in the house is indispensable. My stepmother also told me that the taste of a pregnant woman changes unpredictably. After waiting, after a while, you'll get used to it as you eat. Fan Kinjao said oh and stopped asking. Instead, he looked at the soup bowl in Sun Che's hand. I just asked out of curiosity. Uncle Sun should drink the soup quickly. Sun Che. It's really going to kill you. He has never been so nervous even when he was interrogating a heinous criminal. Even before drinking the soup, he secretly glanced at Fan Kinjao. Seeing that Fan Kinjao really had no intention of speaking again, Sun Che took a big gulp of the rock sugar snow pear in the bowl. Unexpectedly, a stinging sensation in my nose exploded in my mouth. Sun Che, who was completely unprepared, almost dropped the bowl in his hand as his hand trembled due to the heat. Cough cough cough, cough cough cough. Sun Che coughed violently while looking at the soup bowl in his hand in shock. His nose was filled with tears and runny nose, and it was so hot that he couldn't even straighten his waist. With his eyes blurred by tears, he saw Fan Kinjao standing in front of him, handing over the tea in his hand. Sun Che didn't even think about it, and drank it in big gulps. It wasn't until he drank all the tea leaves that he felt that he had saved another life. Fan Kinjao looked at Sun Che's embarrassed face and said in a calm voice, "I added pepper to this soup." Sun Che. If it were anyone else, Sun Che would definitely think this was a joke. But thinking about the Zhao family who had been tortured by Fan Kinjao and sent to the Yamen, he had every reason to believe that what Fan Kinjao said was true. "Xiao Kinjao, what are you doing?" Sun Che asked, while examining himself, whether he had really done something heinous, or why he had provoked Fan Kinjao to add more to his soup bowl. "Black pepper?" Fan Kinjao looked at Sun Che, who frowned and raised his eyebrows. "Is Uncle Sun angry?" Sun Che. Shouldn't he be angry? Among the medicinal materials, pepper has the effect of warming the middle and lowering qi, eliminating phlegm and detoxifying. Now added to this rock sugar pear, although the taste is not very good, it is beneficial to the body. She just added some pepper, but he couldn't stand it anymore. But her mother was tormented by things she didn't like every day. Sun Che's tongue was still a little numb. "It's just that I don't like spicy things." Fan Kinjao looked at Sun Che with indifferent eyes, not missing any expression on his face. "Uncle Sun can refuse to eat spicy food if he doesn't like it, or even get angry, but my mother isn't it unfair to smile with gratitude to the old lady of the Sun family when you swallow something you don't like?" Sun Che was stunned for a moment, and then suddenly said, "Xiao Kinjao, you have misunderstood. What you continue to do with Li Rong every day is for Yu Lian's good. She is pregnant now." Sun Che wanted to explain, but he couldn't finish his words midway through. Fan Kinjao looked at Sun Che, who was still in shock, and raised his eyebrows. "Don't do to others what you don't want others to do to you. Uncle Sun can refuse things he doesn't like, but why can't my mother?" Sun Che said. "I really don't know how to answer this. What I hate most in my life is to suppress my own thoughts and purposes on others under the banner of my good for you. Maybe the starting point is good, but as long as the person who suffers it doesn't need it, then everything will be imposed on others. Everything on your body is a kind of torture, whether it's good or bad. Those who dare to hurt her mother, regardless of whether you are a human or a ghost, will not be called Fan Kinjao unless you peel off a layer of skin. But now, no matter how much Fan Kinjao wants to chop up the old lady of the Sun family and Zhu Orang and feed them to the dogs, he must suppress the cruelty in his heart. This is my mother's residence, she can leave after venting her anger. But the mother can't. I hope Sun Che can understand what she means and don't waste the time she wasted today." Sun Che was so embarrassed by Fan Kinjao that he always felt as if he had escaped from death. But Fan Kinjao's words made him think deeply. Is everything everyone is doing now really good to Yu Lian? It doesn't seem to be the case. Yu Lian eats very little when eating every day. He actually asked her why. She said every time that the weather was too hot and she had no appetite, but he really believed it. Thinking again of the time when his stepmother asked him to sleep in a separate room in the name of her children, Yu Lian looked at his hesitant expression. Sun Che really felt as if he had neglected something. "Don't worry, Xiao Kinjao, I will go visit Yu Lian in a while, and I will definitely have a good talk with her." After thinking about it carefully, Sun Che really felt that the problem seemed a bit serious. Fan Kinjao said, "Mother is still asleep, and I'm afraid she has no appetite for dinner. If Uncle Sun wants to visit Mother, he'd better go a little later." Now when I go to see my mother, I can't see the surprise she carefully prepared. Sun Che always felt that there was a hidden edge in Fan Kinjao's dark eyes that made him tremble all over. But after hearing what she said, he decided to let Hua Yuelian rest first. Don't worry, I will do it. Fan Kinjao knew that Sun Che was a man of his own words, and as long as he agreed, he would definitely do it. After another moment of pause, Fan Kinjao stood up and left. Otherwise, she was afraid that if she stayed any longer, she would really be unable to control herself and chop the old lady of the Sun family into pieces with a big knife. Sun Che stood up to see him off in person. This scene shocked the servants in the mansion. They had heard that the madam's daughter was here, but they didn't know Fan Kinjao's identity at all, but they didn't expect that the lord would pay so much attention to the madam's illegitimate daughter. The young man at the front door porter didn't dare to be lazy anymore. He opened the door in a daze and watched his master personally send people to the carriage. Getting on the carriage, Fan Kinjao deliberately raised the curtain and looked outside. I didn't see the old lady of the Sun family and Zhu Orang. I think that at this time, Zhu Lirong was pulling the old lady of the Sun family to find a solution. This is the best. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 518. Chapter 518. It's the bustling Sun Mansion. When Fan Kinjao returned to his mansion in the western suburbs, Yuluo and Peng Jing were already waiting in the courtyard. When they saw the young lady, Yuluo and Peng Jing were extremely excited. Fan Kinjao called the two of them into the room, and then carefully asked about the current situation of Qingnanzai. At first, a fire burned down Qingnanzai. Fortunately, Yuluo and Peng Jing were both quick and able to move out a lot of goods before the fire completely engulfed the shop. In this way, after Madame used the money to rebuild Qingnanzai, they would not really have nothing to sell. Fortunately, the official ladies and wives in the main city still knew the products of Qingnanzai, and after the shop reopened, the business was not affected at all. Although the fourth lady has been accompanying the young lady in the palace, she has always been in contact with us. Every time it is time to replace the new product, she will take the initiative to write a letter and send the recipe for the new product. The slave will prepare the recipe according to the fourth lady's recipe. The new product will be handed over to the old lady for review. The old lady will nod, and we can find someone to mass produce it. Fan Kinjao was indeed a little surprised when he heard Yuluo's words. Unexpectedly, Mu Yan did not neglect the affairs of Qingnanzai even when he was at the palace. I think Mu Yan never told her because he didn't want her to be distracted by trivial matters anymore. Fan Kinjao looked at the accounts handed over by Peng Jing again, then nodded and said, in the future, the accounts will also be handed over to the fourth miss for review. Mu Yan is now fully able to support Qingnanzai. In this way, after Mu Yan gets married, she can be considered to have her own business. Help me find these medicinal materials as soon as possible, the more the better. Fan Kinjao wrote out a list and handed it to Peng Jing along with the account book. Today, Peng Jing and Yuluo have already gained a foothold among the medicinal merchants in the main city. In addition, Qingnanzai has always been supported by the Su family. Which merchant in the main city does not want to sell face? By the time Fan Kinjao finished talking to Peng Jing and Yuluo, it was already dark. As soon as Yuluo and Peng Jing left, Fan Kinjao called Ningtian in again. Tonight you go to the Sun Mansion to guard. No matter what happens, you don't need to come forward, just listen quietly. Ningtian nodded, turned, and left. At the same time, Ta Shui quietly slipped into the house. When he looked up at Fan Kinjao, his dark eyes were full of cautious flattery. I think I was afraid of being hungry. Fan Kinjao was still angry, but he had no intention of actually starving Ta Shui to death. He took the letter from Taxiu and asked Ningtian to lead him to dinner. Fan Kinjao sat back on the bed, unfolding the letter full of ink fragrance by candlelight, and familiar handwriting came into view. The eldest prince has already headed to the main city under the supervision of the fifth prince. Counting on it, he should arrive in a few days. On the day the eldest prince set out, the palace received a personal letter from the emperor. There was no explanation in the letter, but it was just asking about the prince's condition and injuries. Such attention has never been seen before. Even the people at the palace are now more and more in awe of Bailey Fengming. A prince without power is indeed not worth mentioning. But it was different for the prince who received the emperor's attention. Fan Qingjiao's lips curled up slightly, revealing a sneer. Sure enough, the emperor had already guessed that the third prince must have had a hand in the eldest prince's assassination of the prince. It was when the son beside him began to disappoint the emperor and became scrupulous, that the emperor would think of the prince who was far away in the palace. After all, in the emperor's heart, the prince has always been obedient to his orders. This is what selfish people are like. If there is no use value, they will throw it away ruthlessly. If there is use value, they will ruthlessly extract it. In front of this emperor who only lives for himself, there has never been any family affection to talk about. Even if the emperor is partial to Bailey wrongs, his most precious thing is still his own interests. However, Fan Qingjiao does not think that now is a good time to return to the palace. In total, it has been less than half a year since Bailey Fengming was seriously injured. During this period, the emperor simply forgot about Bailey Fengming in the palace, let alone caring about her. Since the emperor had no one around him anymore, he thought of Bailey Fengming who was far away in the palace. Such an extremely selfish person cannot let him have it too easily. To put it bluntly, it would be better to make him more anxious. Bailey Fengming also has the same meaning. There is no intention of returning to the main city between the lines. He even told Fan Qingjiao to take good care of his body. Fan Qingjiao simply closed the letter without even reading the rest of the lingering and flattering words. Now the paper is full of tender words. What were you thinking about when you hid it from her? Turning around to look out the window, the night was getting darker. I think at this time, the good drama over the Sun family should be going on. Fan Qingjiao was right. At this time, Sun Che left the study and walked to Hua Yuelian's yard. Actually, this is also his yard. Whether it was before or after the wedding, Sun Che had no intention of marrying again, so he simply let Hua Yuelian live in the courtyard where he had always lived. But all in all, he hasn't been there for 2 months. During the day, he was busy with official duties, and at night, Zhu Lirong accompanied Hua Yuelian. Even if he missed her, he would not dare to go there rashly. After all, there was a cousin living in the house, and he still had to avoid suspicion. Over time, Sun Che got used to days like this. Moreover, his stepmother and cousin also took good care of Hua Yuelian, so he gradually felt relieved. If it weren't for Fan Qingjiao's bowl of pepper and rock sugar stewed pear during the day, he would still be immersed in his own comfort. Thinking about Hua Yuelian's increasingly depressed expression recently, Sun Che was lying when he said he didn't feel guilty. It was because he was careless. The candles in the room were still lit, and Sun Che quickened his pace even more as he entered the courtyard. When he went up the steps, he thought about how to send his cousin away first, but when he reached out to lift the curtain, a clear and shallow conversation came from the room. "Sister-in-law, this is the broth I specially stewed for you. You should drink it while it's hot in the room." Zhu Lirong handed the already cool soup bowl to Hua Yuelian. Under the candlelight, there was nothing in the soup bowl except dark brown soup. Because it was a little cold, a thick layer of lard was already hanging on the edge of the bowl. At night, Hua Yuelian heard from the servants in the house that the old lady of the Sun family had stewed pork ribs and yam in her yard. She didn't expect that the leftover soup was delivered to her. On normal days, Hua Yuelian would really just hold back and drink. Speaking of which, this is not the first time such a thing has happened. As long as Sun Che doesn't eat at night, they will eat separately, and every time the old lady of the Sun family eats whatever she wants, that's the soup she gets at night. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 519. Chapter 519. My daughter cannot be slandered. But today, thinking about how the old lady of the Sun family and Zhu Lirong didn't know how to restrain themselves in front of their daughter, Hua Yuelian felt nauseated. I have no appetite now, so let's put it aside for now. Zhu Lirong stood there holding the soup bowl without moving, and pushed the soup bowl towards Hua Yuelian again. This is stewed with delicate pork chops. How could my cousin-in-law let me down like this? Kindness. Waves of the smell of solidified lard penetrated her nose, and Hua Yuelian couldn't bear it anymore, holding her chest and retching. Vomit, vomit. Sister-in-law, what's wrong with you? Are you feeling uncomfortable somewhere? Zhu Orong asked with concern, but she stood still and didn't move. Hua Yuelian suppressed the feeling of nausea and slowly raised her head. When she saw Zhu Lirong still standing in front of her, she swept the soup bowl angrily. Click. The soup bowl shattered on the ground, and the oily soup inside spilled on the ground. The greasy smell in the room is even stronger. Zhu Lirong froze on the spot with an innocent face, tears welling up in her eyes. Cousin-in-law, what are you doing? That's the soup I worked so hard to make. You can't knock it over even if you don't drink it? Ah! Just as he was talking, the expression on Zhu Orong's face began to change. Gradually, that innocent look no longer exists, and what remains is full of disgust and impatience. Looking at Hua Yuelian, who was sitting next to the bed, Zhu Orong raised her lips in a sinister manner, and said with a smile, or is it that my cousin-in-law is just a shady person? But think about it, there is such an arrogant person, you bastard. How can you, a mother-in-law, be any better? Hua Yuelian looked at Zhu Lirong like this and was not surprised. After all, she would be threatened by Zhu Orong like this every night. But now, Hua Yuelian narrowed her eyes slightly and warned, you are not allowed to slander my daughter. Slander? I think what I said is the truth. I heard my cousin say before that you and your daughter were kicked out by your husband's family. I still sympathized with you a little, thinking that I would wait until I marry my cousin. Brother and queen, I share the burden with you, but now it seems that you are as cheap as your daughter, and you deserve to be abandoned. As long as Zhu Lirong thinks of Fan Qinjiao's majesty in front of her today, she will spit fire with hatred all over her body. Just because she is the crown princess, she can do whatever she wants? At the end of the day, he's just a whose father doesn't want him. Hua Yuelian squeezed the bed frame on the side. Sun Che will never look down on a duplicitous person like you. If you dare to insult my daughter again, I will fight you to the death even if I risk everything. Zhu Lirong glanced at Hua Yuelian's belly with disdain, and smiled sarcastically. I have told you a long time ago that you should obediently make a place for me. I have no intention of asking you to get out, but I just want to be here. There is only a position here, but you are shameless and have been occupying your cousin. Now you can't stand it when you hear me scolding your daughter? But whoever called her deserves to be scolded. After hearing this, Hua Yuelian slowly stood up and walked off the bed. Under Zhu Lirong's eyes full of hatred and greed, she closed her eyes and gently stroked her belly. Child, my mother is sorry for you and cannot let you come into the world safely. But your sister has already sacrificed too much for my mother, and my mother will never allow anyone to dare to slander my daughter. You need to be stronger and more ambitious. If you are really destined, after you are born, your mother will personally apologize to you. A line of clear tears rolled down the corner of my eyes, silently, sad and decisive. Suddenly, Hua Yuelian opened her eyes, and without even thinking about it, she raised her hand and landed it on Zhu Orion's face. Snap dash. With the crisp sound, Zhu Lirong was a little stunned. Zhu Lirong covered her beaten face in disbelief and looked at Hua Yuelian in shock. Hua Yuelian tensed her body and warned word by word, "No matter what idea you have, as long as Sun Che agrees, I will not object, but you are absolutely not allowed to use those dirty and despicable words again. My daughter is smart, calm, and responsible. She is definitely not comparable to someone like you. If you continue to speak ill of my daughter, I will risk my life. I won't let you go." Zhu Lirong has never seen Hua Yuelian looking like this. From the moment she followed her cousin in, no matter how much she insinuated herself or secretly put pressure on Hua Yuelian would always remain silent. But now Hua Yuelian is like a beast that is ready to attack. But why? He is just a despicable person who has been abandoned by others. Why should he show off his power in front of her? She is young and considerate, but how can she be compared to such an unclean woman? The shock in Zhu Lirong's eyes was slowly replaced by anger. "Since you don't want to do well, then just go and die. Anyway, my cousin is facing me now, and my cousin believes in me. Even if the child in your belly is really gone, you will still die. No one will suspect me," Zhu Lirong said, suddenly reaching out and pushing towards Hua Yuelian. At the same time, Sun Che, who had been standing outside the door for an unknown length of time, rushed in with the cool breeze. While blocking the two of them, he held Hua Yuelian tightly in his arms. The expected pain did not come. Hua Yuelian opened her eyes in confusion. When she saw the familiar face in front of her, she was completely confused. Sun Che. Sun Che looked at the cautious woman in front of him, feeling so distressed that he almost suffocated. "It's me, I'm here." He was wrong. He was wrong from beginning to end. He believed whatever his stepmother and cousin said. "I have always believed in what I see in front of me, but I have never thought that people can actually pretend. I'm sorry, Yulian, I was careless. As long as I'm here from now on, no one can hurt you." Sun Che slowly raised his hand and heartbrokenly stroked the face that had been fattened by others. It was Hua Yulian with such an appearance that made him believe what he said to his cousin. "But I don't know that everything has ulterior motives. Tears, I don't know when they will burst out." Hua Yuelian wanted to tell Sun Che that she actually didn't blame him. She knew he was busy. But all the sadness and grievances were stuck in her throat, so stuck that she couldn't say a word. Zhu Lirong looked at her cousin, who suddenly appeared in shock, her whole body frozen in place. She tried her best to regain her original appearance and cried in a very innocent manner, "Cousin, you are finally here. I don't know what happened to my cousin-in-law. It scares me to death." Sun Che ignored the crying behind him and helped Hua Yuelian to the bed. After helping her sit on the bed, he said softly, "Wait for me here. I'll come back as soon as I go." After finishing her words, she turned around and walked towards Zhu Lirong, grabbed her arm and pulled her out. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 520. Chapter 520. The Sun family has no peace. Zhu Lirong was really scared. Her wrists were clenched tightly and hurt, and she shed more tears due to her guilty conscience and fear. She didn't know how her cousin could appear without warning, let alone how much her cousin had heard. But if her cousin really dislikes her, what should she do? No, she must never go back to that remote village again. "Cousin, what are you doing? It hurts me so much when you pull me. Cousin, please let go of me first, and I'll explain to you." Zhu Lirong struggled with all her strength, but Sun Che's hands were like iron pliers, unable to break free at all. Of course Sun Che couldn't let Zhu Lirong run away like this. Since the person was brought by the stepmother, some things must be explained clearly to the stepmother with the person. Zhu Lirong's cries became louder and louder, alarming the entire mansion. The old lady of the Sun family, who was about to go to bed, heard the crying, hurriedly put on her shoes and ran out. She happened to see Sun Che pulling Zhu Orion into the yard. "Che, what are you doing? Look how scared you are of Orion." The old lady of the Sun family came over quickly and hugged Zhu Orion in her arms. Sun Che looked at the old lady of the Sun family and said coldly, "What happened? My stepmother should ask cousin Li Rong." The old lady of the Sun family was shocked and looked down at Zhu Lirong in her arms. "What's going on? Didn't you mean to force Hua Yuelian tonight and make Hua Yuelian nod and let Sun Che take a concubine? Why did it end up like this?" Zhu Lirong dodged Sun Che's gaze and said in a hoarse voice, I don't know what happened. My cousin-in-law was very angry tonight. She spilled the soup I specially cooked and she was still there all the time, scolding me. I just wanted to ask my cousin-in-law about the past affairs of the crown princess. Unexpectedly, my cousin-in-law hit me directly and warned me not to talk about the crown princess in the future. I originally wanted to apologize to my cousin-in-law, but my cousin came. The old lady of the Sun family understood. It was originally her idea to let Zhu Lirong have a showdown with Hua Yuelian tonight. Now that I heard Zhu Lirong say this, I was afraid that Sun Che had heard something. Thinking about this, the old lady of the Sun family was also excited. Sun Che didn't expect that until now, even in front of him, Zhu Orang would dare to confuse right and wrong. Thinking about how he could believe such a person before, he just wanted to slap himself twice. A book full of saints and sages may have been read into a dog's belly. Cousin Li Rong, I, Sun Che, pride myself on treating you well, and Yu Lian has always been tolerant of you, but how could you do such a thing? Now that I have heard everything with my own ears, you are still here. Sophistry, you are really a child who cannot be taught. As soon as Zhu Lirong heard that Sun Che had heard everything, she felt so guilty that she didn't dare to raise her head again. Seeing this, the old lady of the Sun family looked at Sun Che and said, Che, since you have heard it, I won't hide it from you. The matter of wanting Li Rong to be your concubine is actually mine idea. Sun Che was stunned in disbelief. Why are you like this? Why can't I do this? Even if you are not my biological child, I have the right to make decisions for you after marrying your father. That Hua Yulian looks like a nuisance at first glance. How can Oriol have a child? Seeing that things were already like this, the old lady of the Sun family simply opened the skylight and spoke frankly. Besides, don't think that I won't know if you don't tell me. Who in the city doesn't know that Hua Yulian is a second-hand commodity? You just take it, be a baby. Stepmother. You don't have to call me, I did all this for your own good. Even if your father comes, he won't be able to say no. Seeing that Sun Che was still looking straight at her, the old lady of the Sun family simply sat down on the ground. No matter how many servants were standing outside the yard, she started crying. Oh my! It's not easy for me to be a stepmother. It's obviously for my son's good. I take a concubine for my son to make him live a comfortable life. It doesn't matter if my daughter-in-law doesn't appreciate it, but my son also prefers that vixen. Who am I doing this for? Ah! God, you have to make the decision for me. If my son kicks me out today. The old lady of the Sun family sat on the ground, patting her thighs, crying so hard that she was out of breath. Seeing this, Zhu Lirong threw herself on the old lady of the Sun family, crying loudly along with her. Sun Che took a step back, his fists clenched under his sleeves. In fact, such things are not uncommon in the countryside. Which girl in the countryside doesn't cry like this when things don't go her way? But it was obvious that Sun Che, who had been reading books about sages since he was a child, really couldn't adapt. Seeing that her cousin was obviously shaken, Zhu Lirong hurriedly called to the servants outside, "Didn't you see that my cousin is about to die? Why don't you go find the doctor quickly? If something happens to your cousin, what do you think in this house, who else can support you? These words can be regarded as waking up the servants outside the yard. They all came with the old lady of the Sun family. If the old lady of the Sun family is not good, how can they be good? Sir, the old lady is doing this for your own good too. Sir, take a look at it, see who among us is famous and doesn't have 3 wives and 4 concubines. The old lady is really thinking about you, my lord, otherwise, why would she leave her own son alone and come all the way here? My lord, if my wife stops you from taking a concubine, then my wife is guilty of 7 crimes. The servant's words hit Sun Che's heart one after another. Of course Sun Che would not sway himself from taking a concubine, but he really could no longer scold his stepmother. These servants are right. The stepmother did something wrong, but her intention was good. With this in mind, Sun Che looked at the old lady of the Sun family and said, I hope you will stop thinking about taking concubines. When I first married Yu Lian, I said I would not marry her again. After saying that, Sun Che turned around and walked out of the yard. Hearing this, Zhu Lirong hurriedly wanted to call her cousin. The old lady of the Sun family secretly held Zhu Orirong's hand and whispered, Why are you anxious? As long as we don't leave for a day, we will still have a chance. The most important thing now is to stabilize the person first. Zhu Lirong looked at Sun Che's leaving figure and could only nod helplessly. In order to make Sun Che really scared, the old lady of the Sun family deliberately cried and howled in the yard for a long time, complaining that her heart hurt. Zhu Lirong simply knelt down in Hua Yuelian's yard with her eyes red and swollen, pleading with Hua Yuelian to let her cousin go. If she wanted to blame her, she should blame herself. Sun Che was really worried that something would happen to his stepmother, so he hurriedly asked someone to go out and call a doctor. This night, the entire Sun family was tortured by Mrs. Sun and had no peace. End of this chapter.